Do you have any idea how many people have signed up?
We had 14 as of right before we started.
Okay, so there's 11 on now, so that's good.
All right, we're up to 11.
Good afternoon, John.
Hey, I think we're just waiting for a few more people to join. Actually, we're up to 13 now, so I think it's pretty close to what we expected. So we'll give it to 12:05 and then we can go ahead and get started if that's okay.
John, this is Jason Bradley with one of the officers with the South Carolina chapter. Really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us. And that's fine. Feel free to start when you feel appropriate. And thanks again. Appreciate everything you do for us.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. So it is 12:05. I'm going to go ahead and get started as other people join. I can always, talk to people offline as well. My email is there on the screen right now. You should see the first page of the presentation and titled Attorneys in Transition, Job Search Tactics, ACC South Carolina chapter. So if you're not seeing that screen, let me know. But I think everybody should see that now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm John Buckley, and I've done these types of presentations for job search over the years, and really kind of the genesis of this was my own need to job search. I've throughout my career tended to work in businesses that are experiencing rapid change, let's put it that way. A lot of times startup businesses, sometimes businesses that are in transition through M&A or maybe through bankruptcy or some other type of turnaround situation. And what I learned fairly early in my career was that all of those are jobs, while fun and exciting, and I liked it and it suited my personality well, are also jobs that can frequently end unexpectedly, or maybe I shouldn't say unexpectedly, but quickly. And so you need to always be in the market. And I started to learn that the skills of doing that, really way back in the 90s, early 90s. And so, and I started providing presentations to people in the late 90s on, the tactics that I used and to try and keep my career moving forward. I've been the first in-house counsel for 3 different startups, and I think, you've probably heard that 70 to 90% of startups fail. And what they don't often say, but is equally as true, is that those that are successful, more than half of them get sold. So either way, you end up looking for a new job. And I've been in a lot of situations like that. So these are kind of the skills that I've developed, and that's what I'm sharing with folks. What I'd like to do is go ahead and move to the next slide. Okay, you should see my picture. There's my email address again. I do have a number of different LinkedIn. That's my LinkedIn profile. The Opt for Change group that I have, which is just an open, or it's a closed group, but you can join if you're interested. And then Opt for Change website, and I even have a Twitter account, although I don't use it that often. The overview is that, this is going to be pretty quickly touching on a lot of different areas. I do have some specific topics, LinkedIn profiles, networking, resumes, and interviewing that I can do a deeper dive presentation in if you're interested in down the road. For this presentation, I'm looking at an audience, I think, that is made up of, and I'm using these terms because as I go through the presentation, I'll specify some differences that your job search might want to take depending on your actual situation. So, there's the classically unemployed. There are the folks who are underemployed. That is, they have a job, but it's not a job that fully utilizes their skill set. There are folks who are uncomfortably employed. That is, that they have a job, they may like their job, but they're not comfortable that their job is going to last very long. And then there are people who are unhappily employed, and they may have a boss they don't really care for, and maybe some other issue with the job that's not pleasing to them. All of those folks tend to be in job search mode, but it can be a little bit different job search. And this presentation is going to focus on what I call job search tactics, and tactics are different than strategies. Some of the strategic things that you'll want to do, and I'll go through these at a high level, have much more effect than the tactics do. And so strategic decisions you make in your job search are going to be more important. But within those strategic decisions, if you go head to head with somebody who's not implementing these tactics, you'll be a step ahead. And so, an example of a strategic decision would be, what's the geography for your search? And so if you're going to be located in one, urban area, that's going to be a different strategy than somebody who is willing to go, across the country for a job. And that's going to affect your ability to find a job. And obviously, somebody who's more open to relocation is going to have an easier time to find a job. But it might not be, not be a job that would be acceptable to you if you're in a narrow geography. So the first thing you're going to want to do is do a self-assessment. And you're going to go through and identify things that are your actual goals for your job. You're going to define, things like what kind of salary is the minimum salary you could take. And then you're going to develop a search plan, and that's kind of targeting, for example, the types of companies or which companies. I usually recommend people target about 50 companies that you're going to put into your search plan. And that 50 evolves over time. There are ones that come in and go out, but you should always have about 50 that you're looking at. And then you're going to develop your search materials, and that's things like your LinkedIn profile and resumes, and maybe templates of cover letters and other documents, reference lists, those types of things. And then you've got to do the real work, which is implementing the search. And so, and then once you finish that, you start over, you go back to your goal setting again. And this is just a cycle that you kind of go through over and over during your job search. Now, I'm not saying you need to go out and read things, but for people who want to have some references, these are a couple of books that I do recommend. The Startup View is a good book. It's actually written by the guy who started LinkedIn. And Highly Effective Networking, Orville Pearson, is one of the best networking books that are out there. There are 4 ways that you can get a job. I'm just going to run through them. The first way is to work with a recruiter. It helps if you have a prior relationship. You got to recognize that they're specialized by field and industry. It's a relatively easy thing to do to reach out to a recruiter. The second way is to just reply to job ads that are advertised on job sites. And that again is easy. You know, there's a lot of candidates that follow that pattern. You can just send unsolicited resumes to potential employers. Unsolicited is pretty easy to do as well. I don't see a lot of success in that, but where there are success, the 2 areas I've noted at the top here, if you're interested in doing some type of adjunct teaching, which if you're a lawyer, the JD puts you in a position actually to go teach classes, you know, at for example, in MBA programs or other programs that might be master's or undergraduate programs that have a legal component to them. Schools are open and interested in having adjunct teachers, and you can send your resume in unsolicited and you might get some traction there. The other area is nonprofits. Nonprofits a lot of times will accept unsolicited resumes and get you some traction. But far and away, the way most people get jobs is through networking. And part of the reason for that is networking is hard to do. It's hard work, and a lot of people don't initially apply themselves to it, but eventually they get around to it. And that's the way that they find a job. And if you go back to that highly effective networking book, one of the things they talk about in there is that it takes about 75 meets on average to get a job. And that's an average. Some people will do it quicker than that. Some people it'll take longer. So let's talk about applications a little bit first. There are these things called applicant tracking systems that are out there. If you're not familiar with them, this is the way that companies nowadays screen applicants, and they need to do that just because of the immense volume. What we've done in the last 20 years or so, especially in the last 10, has made it really easy for anybody to apply to a job. And what that has done is just overwhelmed companies, employers. And so they've had to, you know, kind of develop or find ways to absorb all of these applications, sort them out, and identify the ones that they're really going to look at. And these systems that they use are called applicant tracking systems generically. There's a lot of different ones out there, and they have different approaches, but the key thing that you need to understand is that you're uploading your resume into this system, and this system is breaking that resume apart and putting it into fields. And sometimes it does that well, and sometimes it doesn't. And so a lot of that depends on the quality of the resume that you have in terms of being ATS friendly or applicant tracking system friendly. And that means that it has to have some standard headers, that it's not colored, it doesn't have boxes, it doesn't have excess lines. Some of the other things that you'll want to do with an applicant tracking system are to avoid date gaps in your employment, because one of the things that an applicant tracking system will do is it'll scan through and put your jobs in different fields, but then it'll look at the dates of employment. And if there's a gap, it'll actually score you lower in your rank, or at least some of the ATS systems will. And so that's a concern that you have. And one of the things that you want to do is try and fill those gaps in employment with some type of activity. A human will read it and understand that that's not a job that you filled in there, but you want the applicant tracking system to, frankly, view it as if it was just another job, so that it doesn't dock you for having a gap. The last thing that you want to think about is leveraging metadata. And as attorneys, I think a lot of us are familiar with metadata. In the form of, you got to be careful what gets carried with a document when you send it to the other side in a you know, contract or litigation matter. But you can actually put information into metadata. And if you go into your Word doc, one of the things I recommend, and I recommend it for 2 reasons. One is that it will actually affect the ATS system when it looks at it. But the other is it helps you as well keep track of where the resume, what the job description was that the resume went to. And what you really want to do is, in the comments section of your Word doc, insert a copy of the job ad, or at least the meat and particulars of the job ad, so that when it searches for certain terms, it finds those terms in the metadata, even if they're not in your resume. So the goal of running the gauntlet of the applicant tracking system is to get your resume in front of human eyes. And so it's kind of a balancing act that you have to do with your resume. Is you want it to be human friendly, but you also want it to be ATS friendly. And here are some just resume guidelines that I offer. The first is every job gets its own resume, even if it's frankly an identical resume to the one that you sent out for another job. You rename it, you give it a different naming, and you should have a naming protocol. You give it a different name, you put different information in the comments section in the metadata. And I recommend a naming protocol of, using your name up front, and then some person that you're sending it to, if it's a person, or a company if you don't have a specific individual. And the advantage of putting it to a person, even if it's a person that you don't know personally, it's somebody whose name shows up on the job ad. The advantage of that is that resume will be passed around inside the organization, assuming that you're a viable candidate. And somebody else may see that resume and see your name to the person that it's being sent to, even if it's a person you don't know. Subconsciously, they'll think that maybe it is a person that knows you, that's in their organization. And that will give you a step or an advantage, just an edge above some other candidate who puts, frankly, employment law resume on their resume and doesn't put their name. You want to use your name because your name is your brand, it's your logo. You want to keep the small sizes, or the file sizes, pretty small. I generally say it should be less than 3 pages. Exactly how long your resume is matters less now than it used to, because all that information, people don't print out resumes as much as they used to. It used to be a big deal to put your resume into a PDF format so that it would print, correctly. That's less important now. I generally recommend now that people go with a Word doc format, because you can place the metadata in there, and most systems utilize the Word doc format. The key thing with an applicant tracking system on the ranking side of it is you want to look at the concentration of job ad words. And it's not just adding keywords into your resume. You want to cut out irrelevant words as well. And there are word cloud programs out there that can help you, and you should look for those. You can paste the job ad into the word cloud program and see, rank order the number of words or the number of times each word shows up. And the words that show up the most times are words that you want to have in your resume. Last thing I'll mention on resumes is you generally don't want to go back more than 10 years unless the job ad does. So if the job ad's looking for 12 years experience, then go back 12 years with your experience. But if the job ad's, looking for 5 to 7 years, which is a typical job ad length, don't go back more than 10 years. Just drop that information off of your resume. It doesn't have to be there. What I do recommend is that if you have relevant older information, you capture that in kind of an early careers paragraph, or maybe a couple of lines after your last job, or not your last job, but the job that you're listing on your resume last. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about cover letters. Cover letter, first of all, most recruiters don't even read cover letters, but there are some that value the cover letter more than the resume, and you don't know which one you're dealing with when you send it in. So you need to do a good cover letter, and you need to do a good resume. And the key things that somebody who is reading the cover letter is looking for is they want to know right up front what job you're applying for. And generally, they'd like to know where you learned of it. You want to show that you meet all of the minimum qualifications, and you want to state your belief that you do so. So that should be really kind of upfront in that first paragraph. And then you want to use the second, maybe a third paragraph to show additional unique preferred qualifications and any unique qualifications that you might have for this role, something that stands you out from the crowd. And at the end, you want to ask for some type of contact, the next step, and you want to thank them for taking the time to read your material. And then the last two things, and this really gets into kind of marketing 101, but surprisingly, if you've ever looked at junk mail that comes in the mail, you'll see that it always includes a blue signature. And for whatever reason, and it's inexplicable to me, but it is true, that people respond more often when the signature is in blue. That's why marketers do it. And that's why you should do it on your cover letter as well. The last thing I'll tell you is a little technique that was suggested to me at one time, and I've used it a lot, is to put a PS at the bottom of your cover letter. And the PS is really just a quick summary of, what it is that makes you unique or why you're really interested in the job. And for all those, actually the majority of recruiters who don't read cover letters, they will all drop down and read the PS because it's unusual. And so it's an opportunity for you to speak to the people who didn't bother to read your cover letter and to give them some little snippet of who you are or what it is that makes you a unique candidate. And so I recommend that as well. I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. Anybody has any questions on applicant tracking systems, resumes, or cover letters?
John, are you suggesting putting the entire job description into metadata or just the relevant word cloud concentration words? What's the effects there?
So what I do is I put the substantive part, the part that applies to that specific job. I don't put in, a lot of times there's a lot of EEO disclaimer information at the bottom, and sometimes there's a description of the company at the top. I don't usually include those, but anything that's in the body that includes the responsibilities or the qualifications, the duties, the job, anything where they're talking specifically about this job, I put it in there. And the other reason I do this is, and I've experienced this as well, 6 months down the road, maybe 4 or 5 months down the road, you'll get a ping or an email from a company that you applied to that you thought wasn't interested. You never heard back from them. And they'll say, hey, would you still be interested in that job you applied for? And vaguely, you may remember that job. Well, if you're still in the market, your answer is going to be, yes, I'm interested. And they're going to say, great, let's set up a phone screen for tomorrow at such and such a time. Now you want to go back and look at that job description, and it's been taken down off of whatever site it was on. And there's a lot of reasons this can happen. Sometimes the employer, they actually did hire somebody and that person didn't work out, or they got down the road and that person got a counter offer from their current job and they decided to take it. Or maybe it's that they got to a point where they just didn't find the right kind of candidate. So before they go advertise the job again, they go back through all the resumes they collected. And I've had this happen to me where they'll contact you and they'll say, hey, we'd like to have you for this phone screen. It would be great if you had the resume, or excuse me, the job ad to go back and look at, but sometimes it's not available. And so that's another reason why I like to put it in there, because once you've put it into the resume, if you're keeping all your resumes, which I recommend, you can pull it back out and you can read the job description and you know exactly what they were looking for and you know exactly what you put in your resume that you sent to them. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Let's talk about recruiters for a little bit. The first thing I'd say about recruiters is, there's a reactive step with recruiters where they're coming to you and you need to react. And this may happen at any time in your career. You may not be job searching at the time, but I want to encourage you to always react helpfully. This goes back to the old adage of dig your well before you're thirsty. You want to be opportunistically helpful to recruiters because they'll remember that when you down the road. And what I mean by opportunistically helpful is if somebody comes to you and you're not looking for a job, still try to refer them to somebody else who might be looking for that, might be interested in that job that they're describing. The other thing is, even if it's a job you would never be interested in, but you might know somebody in your network who is more familiar with that space or that field or that industry. Try to refer them that direction so that at least, even if that person's not looking, they've got somebody who's more knowledgeable about the space and might be able to lead them on to another candidate. And if you're helpful to recruiters like this, I mean, they'll keep that in the back of their mind. They'll probably put it into their database that you were responsive and you helped them. And so the next time they have a job that comes up that's anywhere related to your profile or experience, they'll come to you again. And if you do it again and again, where you're always helpful to them, you'll start to be a person that they come to frequently with a job, and that they're looking to fill. And that's going to be beneficial to you when on that one occasion they bring it to you, it is a job that you're interested in looking for, and it is a time that you're looking for a job. So you want to react helpfully. Now, the other thing that I would say is there's a lot of people who, are not passively in the market. They're just not in the market for a job. And you should always be passively in the market. And when I say passive, I mean kind of below your current employer's radar. And the ways to do that as you're working with recruiters is to first kind of research and know the specialists in your industry, in your field, and in your geography. So recruiters specialize by those three categories: by industry, by field, and by geography. So for example, if you're in the energy industry, there are going to be recruiters that just recruit in the energy industry, and they may recruit lawyers, they may recruit engineers, accountant, finance people, HR people. They'll recruit everything in that industry. And you want to know those. And then there are ones that recruit solely by field and recognize that those are, they're going to recruit lawyers. Some of them will specialize in in-house lawyers. But they're going to do it across all different industries. And then there are recruiters who specialize in geography, and so in a geographic area they'll be active. That's a little bit more rare, but what you need to recognize there is that those tend to be temporary jobs or gig-oriented recruiters, and that's valuable, especially when you find yourself out of job and you're not really ready to relocate. Having those connections and those relationships are important too. So you want to follow recruiters on LinkedIn, and follow is a term, it's a specialized term in LinkedIn. You can go into a person's profile and click on the drop down box. Usually it says more. Click on that, and one of the options is to follow. And by following them, that means that whenever they post something, it gets into your home feed and you'll see the information that they post. The other thing that can happen is people, especially recruiters who are savvy on LinkedIn, will see that you have followed them. And sometimes they will follow you back. And if they do, then you can try connecting with them. Even if they don't, they may just view your profile, and that's an opportunity for you to reach out and connect with them as well. You want to be open on LinkedIn to recruiters. Now, if you're passively looking, you want it to be open only to recruiters. Okay. Once you become actively in the market, you expand that to be open to everybody. But when you're passively in, you want it to be set to only recruiters. And you can find that usually in the job sections, sometimes on your profile as well. Actively job searching. So you want to message recruiters when you go active. And that happens when you're no longer concerned about your employer learning of your search. So give them a logical reason, whatever it is. The company's closing a local office, they're going through layoffs, you're uncomfortable with the situation, whatever's going on. And then give them a time goal. You'd like to be in another role by the end of next quarter. That's kind of a reasonable expectation. It tells them that you are active and you're being reasonable. You want to switch that open status now onto LinkedIn to be visible to all members. And then the other thing is recognize that there's a difference between in-house recruiters and recruiters who are, professional outside recruiters. And they have different different goals in mind. And one of the things you can do is after you apply to a job is you can reach out and contact. A lot of times on LinkedIn, it will tell you who the recruiter was who posted the job. Recruiters can switch that off so it's not visible, but if they make it visible, that's almost a conscious decision, and you should, capitalize on that. And after you've made the application online, because you want to do that for EO reasons, a lot of companies rely on their actual online applications as the definition of an applicant. So you want to be a legal applicant, but at the same time, reach out to the recruiter after you've applied so that you have that connection as well. And you can also do that with a hiring manager if you're connected to them. So any questions on this part of the talk before I go on? Okay.
It looks like the chat is clear, John.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn profiles. If you don't have one, that's a big red flag to recruiters and HR professionals. So I really strongly encourage you, if there's still anybody who doesn't have a LinkedIn profile, to get one. I'm going to go through, and you can see here, talk about photos a little bit, talk about headline, the about and the featured, which used to be the summary section. They kind of broke it into two pieces, and then location and industry. There's a lot more to your LinkedIn profile than these things, but these are the highlights. These are the big ticket items that I think will gain you a lot if you make improvements to them. So the first thing that's different about a LinkedIn profile versus a resume is the photograph, right? So you have a headshot and a background photo opportunity, and it's a really interesting 20-60-20 spread of people. 20% don't have any photo, not a headshot or background photo. 60% have just the headshot, and 20% have both headshot and background photo. And that tells recruiters a lot, surprisingly. When they first look at your profile, if you have a headshot and background photo, they are much more interested because they know you are a person who is probably active on LinkedIn. Now, with your headshot, the key thing is you want to have your face visible. The big advantage of the headshot in networking is that, if you go to a coffee shop or you go someplace where you're going to meet somebody and you've been connected to them or introduced to them or, something like that, having their face available for you to look at so you can look around and identify them when you get there is a great benefit. Now, the other thing to recognize is that, these headshots, you can go get one that's professionally done, quote unquote. But you can also get them for free at a lot of conferences. Will have they'll be set up to do LinkedIn profile shots. So you should dress appropriately when you go to a conference, maybe a little bit more business-like than you might necessarily go to if it's a trade show or something like that. And go ahead and get a photograph taken then. All of these photos that you have, these headshot options that are available to you, there's a website called photofeeler.com, and I highly recommend, throwing some of your options up there, getting other people's opinions, which PhotoFeeler is free if you're willing to give your opinion on other people's headshots. You can get their opinion back on yours, and it's valuable. It helps. It has helped me make selections. The other thing to think about is your background photo. What is it that you want to convey a little bit more subliminally there? And the safe option that I always recommend to people is, use a cityscape. It's kind of a long, thin photo that you need, and a cityscape lends itself to that. What I don't necessarily recommend is, something like a beach shot, something that's not work related. That doesn't necessarily send the right message, especially when you're job searching. One of the things that you can do, if you look at mine at the bottom here, I have, kind of a collage of experiences, and you can put multiple pictures into a program called Canva, C-A-N-V-A, and kind of give people an overall picture. I use it for, some conferences that I've, been a panelist at. I have a shot of myself actually speaking at an engagement, and then another shot at, you know, a nonprofit kind of home repair work that I've done. So it gives people a little bit picture of me. Now, here's some examples of bad headshots, and I just want to go through these to make sure that you don't do these kind of things, or to really explain why they're bad. These are, you know, they don't comply with the idea of, hey, I want to know who you are because I want to be able to see your face. This first one in the upper left is busy. It's a little bit too far away. There's a lot of distraction. Several of the other ones, you can't even really see the person's face other than possibly a profile. And in the lower right one, there's multiple people. It's not clear who it is that the picture is even of. These ones that just came in from the right side are just kind of weird. I don't recommend weird in your LinkedIn profile. It puts people off. I definitely don't recommend animals. Probably the most common animal I see is a fish, which also has the issue of, you know, kind of the beach thing, which is not necessarily giving a good positive work ethic vibe. You want to avoid logos, and again, something that's entertainment related probably isn't the best. Even if it is work related, products, things like that, you know, you're missing the opportunity in the headshot if you're putting your product there or your service there. Put those things in the background photo. Use the headshot for what it's meant for, a headshot, so you're visible. Some other things I would warn you against is you don't want your picture to create biases or to amplify biases that people might have and get you eliminated from a position unnecessarily, right? So just the classic things of, you know, that you don't talk about at work, right? Don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics, don't talk about sex. And then what I kind of put into the category of ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, are not things that you necessarily want to display out there either. People have strong biases about those, and you don't want to get eliminated from a job prematurely, especially if it's from somebody who's in between you and the hiring manager. A hiring manager may never see it if the person in between has those biases, and those biases may be conscious, but they could be subconscious as well. Okay, so after the photos, the headline is the most important thing because it's what shows up in addition to your headshot. It's what shows up in the list of search results that a recruiter might get on LinkedIn. It's only 120 characters, and really it can be truncated so that it's really the first set of characters that's the most important. So really probably about the first 80 or so. And what you do want to do with it is identify key skills, maybe industries, some achievements, maybe some certifications. If you're unemployed and actively looking, you want to use the word seeking because that will attract recruiters who are looking for speed to hire, which a lot of times in-house recruiters are. And then you might even want to work seeking in subtly if you are employed but you're desperate to leave. You don't want to use the default. LinkedIn will default your headline to your current job title at your current employer. And sometimes that can be confusing and it's not always good. You don't want to put the name of your current employer there, and you don't necessarily want to use your current title. You want to be forward looking, and recruiters want to see that. So some seeking examples, these are real. Stronger ones describe what you're actively seeking. Weaker ones are really vague, just seeking employment, seeking new opportunities. Those are not very strong. You're wasting that space. So some better example headlines. This is one that I've used in the past, seeking legal counsel. And I describe compliance officer, director, temp or perm, and the skills that I offer. Uncomfortably and unhappily employed people may want to use the seeking term a little bit more subtly, but the key thing is you want to get out onto the headline what your primary skill set is. So if you're an employment attorney, if that's your sweet spot, you know, let that information out there. If you're in-house counsel, but you're more commercial oriented or you're more litigation oriented, you want that information to be out there on your headline. The about section used to be called the summary section. It's after the headline. It's bigger, it's a lot more than 120 characters, and you can put several paragraphs of information there. This is where you want to put the most kind of your story, if you will. And this is for people who probably already have your resume. They'll want to read that story. For people who don't, you also want to put in the bottom a bunch of keywords to try and snag recruiters who are searching. So I kind of separate those two functions of the about section. The featured section, which used to be part of the summary, is now kind of a separate area where you can upload information. You can upload either just pictures or actual documents. And it's good to put a little color in this at this point, and it's an opportunity to put, maybe if you've got some document that would be useful to see as well. So if you put together a document, you'd want to put it up there. Location, the key thing about location is you want to select the location where you're looking to be employed, not some other location, because location is something that a recruiter will use to, whittle down the list of potential candidates, and you want to be able to be in that list. And then industry, LinkedIn frankly has some unusual industry classifications I think are difficult. It's one of the worst things about LinkedIn. But as an in-house lawyer, I would encourage you to be careful and consider using the law practice industry, even though that might not be the industry of your client. It might be better when you're job searching. Any questions on your LinkedIn profiles? Okay. Networking. So the golden ticket of networking is to have a pre-existing relationship with a hiring manager. Pre-existing relationship does not mean getting an introduction after the job has been advertised. That's too late. Okay. So how do you get that? Well, you want to target these 50 growth companies in your target geography. You want to list those down, and you can use the Google advanced search function to identify additional companies that fit your desired profile by searching, the linkedin.com/company/. Then you can develop a coach on the inside for each of those companies. They don't have to be really a friend, just someone who is an acquaintance who has visibility into the part of the company you'd be interested in joining and a willingness to share the possibility of any upcoming openings. So it's a little bit difficult to develop coaches on the inside from scratch, particularly under these stay-at-home conditions. But here's one of the techniques I want to encourage you to try. Set your profile viewing options to allow others to see your name and headline once you've viewed their profile. That's actually kind of the default, but some people change it. I'd encourage you to change it back. You want to go to the corresponding LinkedIn company page for each of those 50 companies you identified. And then you want to open and follow just about every listed employee's profile. Now, it might be too many if it's a big company, so pick the ones that are in your geography. You can narrow it down. And that'll send them a notice that you viewed their profile. And then you want to watch your notifications for people from that company who view your profile back. Okay. And when they do, send them a message like, I noticed we exchanged profile views. Please feel free to accept this invitation to connect on LinkedIn. And from those that accept, then you can begin a dialogue and look for ways to be helpful to them and develop them into a coach on the inside. And you'll be surprised, I find more than half the people that I send that message to end up accepting my invitation to connect. When you do meet with people, either, once we get to the point where we can meet with people for lunch and iced tea and coffee, whatever, again, you want to network with a purpose, face to face. You don't want to be asking for a job. In fact, just the opposite, because people are anxious that you will ask them for a job and they know they don't have one and they don't want to tell you no. And so you want to start by kind of easing their anxiety and tell them, thanks for meeting with me. I spoke with a career coach and he said before I start looking for a job, I should meet with people knowledgeable in your industry. and learn more about the market for the skills that I have. So I'm not looking for a job, but I was hoping I could talk to you about my skills and your industry. Would that be okay? That kind of introduction to the person, it, puts them more at ease, gets them on your side of the table, and gets them to be more helpful to you. And that's really all you're looking for. The truth of the matter is, if they do have a job, they're going to be bursting to tell you about it. So you don't have to worry about asking for the job. One thing, when you're actively looking, you need to get on a lot of people's calendars quickly, and that can be difficult, especially when your own calendar can be pretty fluid. So one of the tools I've used, if you're not familiar with, I recommend that you check into, is called Calendly, and it will allow people to view, your busy times and your available times on your calendar or the calendar that you designate. And that'll allow you to send requests out to people to connect, or to have a phone call or a Zoom call with them, and ask them to select a time from your Calendly invite. And when they do that, it'll close that section off as busy, so you can send it out to multiple people at the same time and not worry about getting conflicts. Another thing that I recommend, especially right now, a lot of companies are kind of on hold as they're looking to what goes on with the economy and the coronavirus on hiring. But at some point, that logjam is going to break loose, and when it does, one of the first places they're going to look is to databases that they have internal to the company, and they call these talent networks. Sometimes you'll see them referred to as talent communities. You want to have your resume in that talent network or that talent community, because I think that, especially now, is a good use of time if you're looking for a job. When you go to your 50 target companies, see if they have a talent network available, put your resume in there. You should also make a point of following each of your 50 target companies on LinkedIn. Okay. Any questions on this section? Okay, last area I want to talk about is interviewing. I've got a few minutes left, I think. Biggest problems that most people have in interviewing are questions from the interviewer that are what they call the behavioral type questions. And these are questions like, they usually start with a hook, like we've all experienced, or anyone with experience in this field has had to deal with such and such. And then they ask you to specifically describe a time when that situation actually occurred to you. And a lot of people kind of stumble on these. And a technique that I've recommended to people is something called, and other people, this isn't my idea, other people recommend this as well. It's called SOAR stories. And you start with the R in SOAR, which is the results. Make a grid 5 columns wide, 10 rows deep. Take some time to list briefly the 10 things. These are the R's that you're most proud of that you've accomplished in your career, 1 per row. And you put those in that 5th column. It may sound easy, but when you start to actually sit down and do it, it's a little bit harder than you might think. And then jump to the 2nd column, which is the S. So you have SOAR, or your 2nd through 5th columns. And in the S column, you want to briefly describe the situation at the beginning of whatever project is that gave you that result that you're most proud of. You don't want to go so far back that it obscures your involvement, but you need to lay enough background there so that people understand, the interviewer understands what it is that you accomplished. So then you go to the obstacle. Some people call it a task or a problem. And so you actually hear it sometimes referred to as a STAR story instead of a SOAR story. But whatever the obstacle is, you want to write a few words to describe that obstacle that you had to overcome. It's, again, just a reminder for you, you know this story. So, and then the next thing you want to do is go to the A column, the 4th column, and put in a little bit of language about, what action that you took. Okay, because it's the action that you took that matters. Now, it's important to acknowledge team efforts and everything, but in the interview process, and especially in the SOAR story, you want to emphasize the actions that you took to achieve what you accomplished. Okay. And so in these behavior questions, then, when the interviewer asks the behavior question, you want to take your time, and which the interviewer expects. They expect to throw people sometimes with these questions. And in your mind, just kind of tick through each of these 10 source stories. You should have committed them to memory. And figure out the one that's the closest. It doesn't have to be an exact match. You just want the one that is closest to what they're asking about. And then you start describing the situation. And then you describe the obstacle. And you particularly want to try and relate the obstacle to the question as much as you can, bend it a little bit. And then talk about the action you took and then summarize with the result. So even if the story is askew from the question, a good story will usually satisfy the interviewer. And if it's something you're proud of, it's going to be a good story. So then the last thing is, interviewers always ask for, do you have any questions? They usually save you time at the end to do that. And the worst response is, no, I think you've answered everything. And I hate that response when I interview people, because it really shows a lack of curiosity and initiative, I think, and that'll get you eliminated from a lot of interviews. So at a minimum, you should Google a list of questions to ask and have that printed out and bring it with you to the interview in a folder or something. But the best result you can get is if you've listed briefly in that column 1, I gave you 5 columns there, a question dealing with the subject matter of each source story. And so when you're asked if you have any questions, open up your folder, which is perfectly natural. People look up questions all the time. And look through your source stories and see if there's one that you haven't shared. There's probably several that you haven't shared. And then say something like, I have a question about this, and read that question that pertains to the source story. Then they'll start answering your question. As they're answering the question and they're going along, there'll be some time when you have an opportunity to say, I had a similar experience once. And then you recount your source story. And then you follow that with the next question. You go through that and you get 2 or 3 more of your source stories out. And to me, when I talk to people who didn't do well in their mind in an interview, it's usually because they didn't get their best foot forward. They didn't get to put the best selves out there. But if you're telling, if you get all 10 of your most proud moments, your most proud achievements in your career out there in an interview, you should get the job. Okay, so any questions on interview? Okay, so that's all I have for this session. If you do have questions, my email's there in the lower left. Feel free to email me at any time. And if there's any questions anybody has on anything, applications, recruiters, LinkedIn, networking, interviewing, I'll try and take those now.
John, do you have any suggestions for remote interviewing? Have you experienced this yet? We're going to give you 30 seconds to answer a question and point a webcam at your head and go, right? Have you had to deal with that yet? And if so, do you have any good suggestions there?
Yeah, so there's 2 different things. You're talking about the kind of the recorded versus live, right?
Well, both, right? So you've got the initial phase of the sort of screening type questions of, we're going to ask you some pre-screening questions, and we're going to give you the opportunity to respond, and you've got 30 seconds.
Yeah.
You may not be able to retake it, it may be off the cuff. And then, the live interview in this format, right?
Right. So I've actually, from the hiring standpoint, we used that when I was at PPMS for a while. And it has some advantages. I mean, there are, you get to, first of all, it forces interviewers to ask standard questions. So you get candidates who get to respond to the exact same question. But what I would say from a candidate standpoint is, just be prepared. You need to be comfortable to be in front of your laptop screen. And I would use a laptop, not a phone, just because it's a little bit more stable. And then, you want to be in an environment, you want to have a background behind you that is not, distracting or messy. And you want to be dressed appropriately like it's an interview. So do those things. You want to line yourself up. Most of those have an opportunity for you to kind of line your head up with your camera pretty well. And so you want to do that, and you want to test the audio. You want to speak clearly. And, to some extent, similar to what I said, these are going to be fairly standard questions. It's not, because it's not live, it's not going to be a behavioral question. It's going to be more of an opinion type question where your opinion is what they're really seeking. And that's an easier question to deal with. But, the main things I would say that are different from an interview is that you have actually more time to prep yourself, and to make sure that you look good, that there's no spots on your shirt or something like that. So is that helpful, or does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of it is sort of your standard how to engage in video conferencing, right? And then some of it is just sort of the tips and
Yep.
tactics you're talking on in the rest of the presentation.
Yeah. Anybody else?
One question I had was particularly at in the resume and potentially in the LinkedIn profile and in the interview as well. Obviously, the main point of any interview or search process is the substance of your skills, your experiences, those kind of things at work. To what extent are what I would call non-work experience things related? And should you emphasize those, like activities in your community, things you've been involved with? Lots of folks put that on the resume. It's generally towards the bottom. Is that stuff valuable in any way? If it is, to what extent is it valuable? How you present it such that it exhibits the value that it's supposed to have?
So I would say there are two different factors there. One is that there are some jobs where that type of community involvement is really important. If you're in some type of business development role, or you're going to be a rainmaker for a law firm, for example, showing that you've got a lot of community connections, it can be really important. The other part of it, though, is that you want to make a connection with people, and you want to do that at any phase of the process, but especially in an interview, it's good to make a connection. And if that connection is something that you put at the bottom of your resume and it just happens to be something that they're interested in, it can make the difference. I mean, that's the truth. So there's some value to it. I think there's a reason that it's at the bottom of the resume. I wouldn't make too big a deal out of it, but if it hooks on somebody, I mean, take the opportunity to set that hook. I remember I had one interview, and it's actually on my LinkedIn profile, but when I was at Penn State, I was on the ultimate Frisbee team, and that was, one of the things that I did in my youth. And I had an interview where, we spent most of the interview talking about ultimate Frisbee, and I got the job. And I'm not saying I didn't have the credentials also, but the connection that I made had nothing to do with the job. So I hope that's helpful as an answer. Like I said, I think there are times when it's a legitimate part of the job, but most of the time it's just to try and make a real connection with the person.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, Kelsey, I think it's one if you want to. I guess I stop my share here.
Yeah. Thank you guys for attending, and thank you, John. That was excellent.
Okay. I'm going to drop off, and I guess, are you guys going to continue to have a meeting afterward?
We will end the meeting.
Okay.
We will end the meeting. Thank you, John.
All right.
So
Bye-bye.
much. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you much.